Israel announced that they were not going to intercept our boats. The most beautiful memory I have, I realized what I thought were colorful rocks were actually people, like thousands and thousands of people. Boys were jumping into the water to swim out to us, and fishermen got in their boats to come out to meet us. It goes back to my point about how Palestinians can have this ability to be in the moment, to feel this joy and love and welcoming.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
All right, here we go. On this episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Palestinian-American Huwaida Arraf. She's an international human rights and civil rights attorney and activist who co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, which has twice been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. She also played a key role in leading the Free Gaza Movement and organizing the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, and is also a former candidate for U.S. Congress.
We are your hosts, Hasan and Zeina Ashrawi. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen. And of course, please follow us on social media, either at Sumud Pod or at Sumud Podcast. Welcome, Huwaida. It's wonderful to have you on with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
So, Huwaida, you were born in the U.S. to Palestinian parents, and your parents came to the U.S. as adults, right? And all Palestinians have a story of dispossession due to the 76 years of occupation and settler colonialism. Your father, for a very long time, did not go back to Palestine and only went back to Palestine, my understanding, is when his father passed away, right? So part of documenting the narrative, I think, is also important to say where our parents are from and why they came here. So Huwaida, can you tell us a little bit more about your parents and where are they from Palestine, and why they came to the U.S.?
So our village is called Melia. It's a very small, all Melkite Christian village in the north, about 15 minutes from the border of Lebanon. My father is from inside 48, and my mom is from the West Bank town of Bet Sahur, which is near Bethlehem. They were 4 or 5 hour drive apart. I know just from tidbits here and there that my father especially felt that we could have a better life here, because in Melia in 48, although technically, we're citizens, we are certainly not equal citizens. And Israel in every way makes you feel that you are a threat, that you are second or third class citizen, but you don't belong, even though it's our village. We've been there for hundreds and thousands of years, and Israel came and established itself on our village. In the West Bank, it was a full-on military occupation. So everything Palestinians did there was controlled by Israel. And so not seeing really any hope, they came to the United States. My father stayed away from Palestine for a while. When we were younger, he wanted to take us to Palestine all the time so that we would have this connection with the land. So I remember when we were young, we would go every 1 or 2 summers. We would go, and I loved the time there. I would be crying whenever we had to leave. Until 1987, when we went, I was about the age of recognizing and paying attention to what was happening around us. I remember being detained at the airport for hours and separated my sisters and my mom and me from my dad. And we were strip searched and humiliated, and they tore our luggage apart. And this was coming in and out. And I think that after that, my dad just didn't want to be put through that again. And so for years after that, he did not go. I remember going whenever I was in Palestine. I was almost a little special, like an American citizen. I was a little bit different. I was, proud American, conditioned to believe that America was this beacon of like freedom and democracy, and we should be grateful to be there. And so I remember at the age of 5, I'm talking about how great America was and how I was going to be the president of the United States one day. We were in the West Bank with my mom's side of the family, and we were going to go to Jerusalem because we were going to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I wanted my aunt and my cousin to go with us, and she couldn't, which kind of upset me. She did say, I don't remember the words exactly, but it was about, it's your country, it's your president that's doing this, which I didn't really understand too much, I think, as a 5-year-old girl. But something about the United States is not letting my aunt come with us to Jerusalem. I knew there were checkpoints. I knew there were soldiers, but being aware then, or just awoken to the fact that the United States has a big role to play in why Israel has these checkpoints and why Israel traumatizes us and why the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is surrounded with soldiers. The United States had a big role to play in that. So that was at the age of 5, a political awakening for me. I remember writing a letter to the president. I don't remember if it was 1987, 1988. I was still fairly young, but my cousin had been detained, arrested, beaten, tortured by Israel. So I wrote a letter to President Bush. And how could he let this happen? I never got a response, and remains that way today. All of the letters and calls that we put into our representatives go unanswered. I became aware that the country that I was so proud of and loved so much and wanted to lead one day was not always this force of good everywhere. And it was having a direct effect on my family.
Huwaida, you mentioned your work with ISM and you mentioned your activism in general, but there's one part that is not outwardly, if you will, work for Palestine, but I definitely see it as such. Hopefully you can elaborate on it a little bit. You gave birth to both your children in Palestine, and you made that a conscious choice. And we also know that you made that choice knowing that your husband, Adam, will likely not be able to be there with you. What was that like? Why did you decide to give birth to the kids in Palestine, and why wasn't Adam able to be with you?
Since my father is from Malia, he was an Israeli citizen, or got citizenship. He was able to pass that on to me and my siblings. But Israel has a law that on its face seems neutral, but in its application, it's detrimental to Palestinians only. So this law says an Israeli citizen can only pass on their citizenship once, so one generation, if their kids are not born in Israel. So my father was able to pass it on to me because I wasn't born there, I was born abroad, but I would not be able to pass it on to my kids if they were not born there. And this was a really, really difficult decision because my husband was deported in 2002 and was not allowed to be back since. So he tried in 2003 and 2004 and was not allowed back in. I'm like, no, just forget it. We'll just have the child here and you'll be there. But he was more adamant because he had done a lot of work with Palestinian refugees and knows really what it's like to be stateless. And not that our kids would have been stateless, but certainly if they were born just with an American citizenship, and I did not give them that Israeli citizenship, Israel could easily keep them out. They tried to deport me a number of times, but were not able to because I have citizenship. They would have to go through a longer process of stripping me of my citizenship and then deporting me, which they still can do, and which they have passed laws that enables them to do it easier. I stayed with an aunt in Jerusalem, although it would have been easier for me to be with my family in Melia, just because I had a lot more family there and a couple of my cousins were doctors. I stayed in Jerusalem and I wanted them to be born in a hospital in Jerusalem, in Maqasid, which is a Palestinian hospital in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives. So I wanted them born in Jerusalem, and specifically at a Palestinian hospital because I couldn't even imagine myself, being surrounded by Israeli nurses and doctors. And because I know how they view us and how they view even us having children, we're a demographic threat to them. Certainly not all Israelis, but so many these days that it's shocking and disappointing. When I came back a year and a half later to have my daughter there, my parents did come with me to take care of my son. And I remember when I went in to give birth, my father and son were waiting outside, and I was hearing tear gas and what could have been bullets because there was Israeli police attacking a group of youth there. So yeah, these are the conditions, but that was the reason. It was to make sure that my kids could have access to their homeland, even if it was by having these papers given by our colonizers that will allow them this access until that system can be dismantled.
I've always thought that was really powerful, and I think this is the most extensive conversation we've had about it, and it's amazing. Samdin, we're still on the ground no matter how much they try to exile or remove us. That is a form of resistance. I see you giving birth there is definitely a form of resistance. Speaking of resistance, one of my first memories of seeing Huwaida Arraf, I have no time frame on this. My time is always skewed. I think it was a video of you standing in front of Israeli soldiers and sort of yelling at them to stop shooting at the kids who were behind you. You were literally in front of the soldiers with the guns pointing at you and the kids behind you. And without even a slightest bit of hesitation, you were telling them to stop and what are you doing? And then continuing on with your ISM work. But that was sort of the moment where I saw you and I said, wait, she came from the United States to put herself in that space. And that totally changed my perspective on this sort of advocacy, international and local advocacy, because we always felt, or at least for myself as a child, I always felt that nobody heard us, nobody knew what was happening. But to see you there was so empowering. My question is, do you think that power came from the ability of having an Israeli passport, having an American passport, and maybe even thinking that was a shield, that it was a difference between you and the kids? Did it come from the fact that you knew you had justice on your side, that Palestine is ours and soldiers don't have a right to shoot kids, period? Where did that come from? Where did it continue to come from? Because then you went on the flotilla as well and put your life on the line. Where does the courage, Huwaida Arraf's courage, come from?
I don't know that I would call it courage. It was a sense of indignation, maybe. I mean, just seeing the injustice, it would outrage everyone. It really infuriated me. But I was always thinking that there's something we can do about it. There's something we have to be able to do about it. And combine that with a little bit of naivete, I think. It is something that the International Solidarity Movement grappled with a lot. And it is this privilege, right? How do we play into the racism and the discriminatory system and use that to just protect people as much as we could? This really was a big issue in 2002 when Israel had reinvaded all Palestinian cities and we were trying to get internationals there. And when cities were under what they called curfew, but lockdown, so any Palestinian walking in the street in Ramallah could be shot. When we had internationals there and we wanted to try to help as much as possible, we weren't necessarily in a protest phase. We were in a trying to help people phase where, people being locked in their homes without food, without medicine. Could we do something about that? Which would require us breaking the curfew and being out in the streets where Palestinians out in the streets would get shot. Sometimes it was doing that and waving your American or European or whatever passport in front of the soldier, in front of the tank, so they wouldn't shoot at you. And it didn't feel good. It's like, okay, because we have different citizenship, that we have more rights than Palestinians on their own land. Do you not take advantage of it and not help when you can help? Bring somebody medicine or get somebody to a hospital or something like that. So part of it was knowing that soldiers do look at me a little bit different. I mean, I look Arab, but speak to them in English, and I would only speak to them in English. That specific day, actually, I wasn't feeling well, and I had not wanted to go to that protest. It was rainy. I had a sore throat. I probably had a fever. I did not want to go, but there were people who I was going to take, other internationals who were supposed to go. And so I went. There was a demonstration, and as usual, it descended into Israel firing, shooting at people. A lot were young kids. They were separated a lot from the soldiers. The soldiers were on higher ground and just kind of shooting down at the protesters. But I stayed up with the soldiers thinking, I'm going to look them in the eye. I'm going to talk to them, try to humanize people. Again, going back to this, fundamentally, we're human beings. People need to be good. Maybe we can touch them, person to person communication, get them to think about what they're doing. And I did that quite a bit. Rachel Corrie was doing that when she was killed. She was using a bullhorn because that soldier was in the bulldozer. But trying to just talk to him as a person, like, what would your mother think of what you're doing? You're destroying this family's home. And so I would do that in front of soldiers, especially when we were kind of facing off a lot. And I know that some soldiers would look like maybe they're affected, and then they'd have their fellow soldier or commander say, don't listen to her, don't listen to her, ignore her. But on that day, I don't know if I would call it courage. It was just a lot of things combined in one. In a lot of other protests, I know that there is a sense of danger. And I know that so many Palestinians have been killed protesting or lost limbs or got seriously maimed. And I have been lucky that I haven't. That day, I thought I was going to get maimed. I don't know if you remember in that video, but when I saw it, because I was trying to stop the soldier first, and then I couldn't actually stop them from aiming their guns. So then I was going to try to get in their line of fire. So I stood up on this boulder and I was putting my hands up to try to block them. And I'm like, I'm going to get my hands blown off. But I stayed there. It's not courage for me because I think deep down there is this kind of sense that passport does impart on me. It's not something I like saying, but it's obviously very true. So what's more courage is when you see all of the Palestinians doing the same or doing more in this situation where they have no rights. So the Israeli soldier can hurt me, could injure me. In the end, I'm arrested. I probably won't be held for very long. Palestinians are taken and they're disappeared and they're tortured, and yet they still resist. So it's like I'm doing my little part, whatever I could do.
So, but just to be clear, that really sparked my fascination in you, and I started following your activism in the United States for that. So I became a huge fan and seeing those solidarity movement, but also you as an activist, as Huwaida Arraf. So that will stick with me and the power forever, because it's not just about the Palestinians on the ground. It's actually being able to leave the US and make a conscious decision to come to Palestine to fight for liberation. It is so extremely powerful to see Huwaida. So just wanted to make sure I point that out to you. I think one of the important parts of your work that got international attention and is unprecedented, trailblazing in a way, was the Freedom Flotilla, the Free Gaza Movement and the Freedom Flotilla. How did that come about? Like, what sparked it? And how did you get so many people from all over the world to join you in doing that? Because it's not just Americans. You had so many different nationalities join, and the power in that. And then maybe talk a little bit about the outcomes and how much Israel and its allies don't care about who's on those boats and the repercussions of hurting people who are standing up for Palestinian liberation or breaking the siege on Gaza for that matter.
The Free Gaza Movement came about the end of 2006, and Israel had imposed this crippling siege on Gaza. They had stopped all aid transfers, and Israel was locking down everything. The international community was thinking that was justified because Palestinians had a free and fair election, and you don't like who they voted for. Eventually, they lifted the sanctions on the Palestinian Authority and on the West Bank, but kept them in place vis-a-vis Gaza. The situation was getting bad in terms of reports from the United Nations and from other organizations in terms of what effects this illegal blockade was having on people. So you had reports of anemia in pregnant women and rising rates of malnutrition in children and stunted growth. And over 50% of the population was unemployed, and nobody was doing anything about it. And really, the stunted growth in children shocked and angered me, because Palestine, Gaza specifically, is not a poor region. It is actually rich in its agriculture, in its soil, in its potential, and that was deliberately being killed. People there were being deliberately starved as a means of warfare, using economics, using food, using access to medicine. Of course, nowhere near what it is today. Back then, this is what it was. We're at the end of 2006, 2007. And Israel was using these policies back then as a means of getting political concessions from people. And that's unlawful, absolutely illegal to use food and water and medicine and deprive people of it in order to gain political concessions, because Israel wanted the people of Gaza to supposedly overthrow Hamas or rise up against Hamas. And the international community was accepting it. So you had all of these reports coming up and nobody was doing anything about anything. I was in law school at the time, but we had some talks from different people who were with the International Solidarity Movement, who had come and worked with us on the ground in Palestine. And an idea came up, and one of them was like, let's sail a boat to Gaza. And I was like, what a crazy idea. I know I've said this kind of before a lot of times, but it really was true that I thought it was just a really stupid idea, in that we don't have boats. We don't know anything about boats. We don't have money to get boats. But some people really thought it was actually a good idea. And I eventually came around to it. But I wasn't one of the founders. I mean, I was in on the initial discussions, but then I went back to focusing on law school, while some people really worked to try to raise the money so that we can get a boat. A lot of times, one of the hardest things to do is actually get the money to do some of the things that we want to do, these direct actions or these kind of political challenges. I understood that. You go to somebody and you want them to give you money so that you can get a boat, so that you can go challenge the Israeli Navy. I mean, it seems it's probably not something that you want to spend your money on, right? Eventually, come the summer of 2008, we gathered in Cyprus and had gone into debt, really, to get 2 small fishing boats. And we were about 44 people from 17 different countries. And we got on these 2 fishing boats. We didn't know if they would even take us across the Mediterranean, really, but we were set on sailing to Gaza, even though Israel was saying, because it was in the media then, that they were going to stop us and no way we could go. We were insistent that we're going and we are not turning back. So if Israel was going to stop us, then it would have to use force against us. And maybe that would highlight to the whole world that what Israel's policy is not about security. It's not just about Hamas being in Gaza. It is about trying to punish an entire people for their political choices. And this should be unacceptable. Like, we thought, oh, if Israel can confront us at sea and we expose this policy, the whole world will rise up and not accept it. And when I think back to that naivete, I don't know if I want to call it naivete, but that's what I thought should be. Like, if people know, then people, again, are inherently good. And we have a system that claims to be the beacons of freedom, human rights, and democracy. Gosh, it's hard to say that. But anyway, so we had these people in Cyprus where we launched from to begin with. And we had gone through, just to give a sense of the kind of people that came to join us, when we were doing trainings, just what to expect if Israel does A, B, or C. We went through all these different scenarios. They could blow up our ship, they could sink us. Best case scenario, maybe we'll just get arrested, but people can get seriously wounded or killed. And we also stress that we don't need everybody to come on the boats. If you don't want to, don't think you are ready for this, and are not willing to keep going no matter what, then don't get on those boats. We need ground crew. We need media help. We need all kind of stuff you can do with absolutely no judgment. And the people that came, nobody had a desire to be a hero or was on a suicide mission or anything like that. You had people like grandparents or students and artists and parliamentarians and professors and medical workers, people who had families and jobs and lives to get back to. But nobody stayed back. Nobody retreated. And I think it was because we had such a belief in the righteousness of what we were doing. Like, it's right to stand up and to confront violence and evil when you see it. And what Israel is doing is wrong. And with whatever we have, 2 small fishing boats and just our bodies, we are going to go confront it. And we are saying, no, like, we don't accept it. It's way past time for just words and speaking. We saw the words coming from the United Nations and these humanitarian organizations, and nobody does anything about it. So we set sail, and Israel jammed our lines in the middle of the sea. We were hoping to be able to communicate out, and we couldn't. And we had arranged for a media boat to come meet us. So if there was going to be a confrontation, there would be at least be media filming it. And that media boat never found us. I mean, it's a big sea. And we were coming on the 24-mile mark, which we thought if anywhere they were going to confront us, it would be there. And we had no communications and we had no media. And we stopped and we're like, what do we do? As we were debating scenarios, we just at the end decided to just sail on. And we did, although some people wanted to stay overnight at least because it was getting late, it was going to get dark, and if they were going to attack us too in the dark, we didn't want that. But those who were saying, no, let's sail on, we're almost there, won out, and we did. And a few miles in, one person that had a satellite phone worked, like it rang. We're like, oh my gosh. She was a journalist, but she got word from her crew on the ground that Israel announced that they were not going to intercept our boats. So there was just so much disbelief and excitement. Like everyone was jumping up and down in the boats, like we're actually going to get to Gaza. This had never been done before. And as we approached Gaza, gosh, the most beautiful memory I have, because I saw what I thought was the port and just lots of colorful rocks on the horizon. But when we got closer, I realized all these, what I thought were colorful rocks, were actually people, like thousands and thousands of people. Because not only did we hear that they weren't going to stop us, but the people in Gaza who were following got word that we were coming and we were actually going to get through. So I don't know how many, I would say over 10,000 people just rushed to the port, and boys were jumping into the water to swim out to us, and fishermen got in their boats to come out to meet us. It was humbling. And it goes back to my point about how Palestinians can have this ability to be in the moment, to feel this joy and love and welcoming. I remember the captain of the ship, the boat that I was on, was from this beautiful Greek island of Crete. And didn't know much really about Palestine, whatever, but when he saw all those people, went off to a corner by himself and was crying. I'm like, what is wrong? It just hit him to see people with this much joy means that their daily life must be the exact opposite. Like, I don't know how he rationalized that, but for him, it was, he saw the pain in their lives from the joy that they were expressing at two small fishing boats, kind of getting in to Gaza. We weren't carrying any aid. We were carrying one small box of hearing aids for a deaf society in Gaza. But it's not like we were bringing aid that they desperately needed. It's not like we had anything. We were just some 44 people on two fishing boats, but they were so excited for that. What does it mean when there's like this much joy and excitement over what we were or what we brought? How can they welcome us in such a way when we came from mainly European countries and the United States? So we were from 17 countries, but it was mainly Europe and the United States. Countries that are complicit in Israel's attempt to annihilate them. Every day they're fighting to stay alive against Israeli forces, and our countries that are supporting that. Here we come on these boats, and thousands, if not tens of thousands, come to meet us and love us and welcome us. That is the side of Palestinians that most people around the world just don't know, because we've been so vilified. Everyone was thinking, oh, we had broken the siege, and we had not broken the siege. Of course, we went through it. We went through it once. We promised the people of Gaza that we would keep sailing until the siege was broken. We would open a sea route to Gaza. And when we left a few people, like 8 people, I believe, in Gaza to restart the international solidarity movement, because the ISM had not been able to get into Gaza since shortly after Rachel was killed. Rachel and Tom Herndal, another one of our volunteers who was killed. So some people stayed, and that freed up a little bit of room on our boats to take some Palestinians out who needed to get out. There was one family, I think they were from Switzerland. They came to visit, a mother and her 4 kids, visit her family. And 2 years later, Israel was not letting them out to go back home to their husband and father and their lives in Switzerland. And we had a young boy, Saad. He was 16 at the time, and he had his leg amputated, like a really high amputation from the hip. He had lost his leg in an Israeli military attack, and Israel was not letting him out, whether going to Israel or whether to go to another country. He could not get out to seek a prosthetic leg anywhere else. So we put him in his wheelchair and his father on our boat, and this mother and her 4 kids, and we sailed out without Israel's permission, like we sailed in, and we promised that we would be back. And one of the first things that I did when getting back to Cyprus is to write to all these world leaders. This is what we did. We are just average civilians. You can do so much more if you say you are opposed to this policy. Get a boat and come with us. The United Nations. You are complaining that Israel is not even letting paper or pencils into your schools. Put your papers and pencils and notebooks on a boat and come with us, because it can't just be our small boat going back and forth if we're really going to open a seaway. We hope that this action would actually motivate more people and organizations and maybe even states to do it. But they did not. We kept going. We did 4 more voyages, or 5 back and forth, and taking in people who Israel wasn't letting in and taking out people who couldn't get out. But we had very little room on our boats. And it was so difficult because you got into Gaza and so many people needed to get out, not because they wanted to leave or abandon Gaza, but you had students that had scholarship and placement in universities and they couldn't go. You had people who needed medical attention and that wasn't available in Gaza and they couldn't go. So you had all of these needs clamoring for spaces on our boats when we would only have a couple of spaces, 2 or 3, because we didn't have really the money to get anything bigger. And we met with students at the university, and one student was like, just take us halfway with you, because there are restrictions when you get into Cyprus, of course, who is on your boat and do they have a visa, etc. And they're like, and then drop us off in the middle of the Mediterranean and we'll swim the rest of the way. Just students desperate to continue their education. The reality was we couldn't do any of that, but we didn't want to give up this way. Then Israel started Operation Cast Lead in 2008, started bombing Gaza mercilessly. We tried to organize an emergency boat. I remember I was in the United States for Christmas holiday and New Year, and we organized this emergency boat, which I wasn't on, but like the following day, I booked a flight out to go back to Cyprus. That boat was hit. Israel hit that ship, almost sank it. We had to be rescued by the Lebanese Coast Guard. And we still didn't want to give up. And we got another vessel and packed it with whatever we could carry, and journalists and people, and set sail. And that ship was almost capsized also. So we weren't making it in. We tried one more time a few months later. Operation Cast Lead was over. We were trying to bring in some supplies. Our ship was small. We couldn't bring rebuilding supplies, but something symbolic. And Israel commandeered that ship, arrested all of us. So 3 times we weren't able to get in. And then we were faced with the choice. It was either we give up on this tactic or we escalate somehow. And I did not want to give in to this might is right thing. And neither did anybody else. And so we decided to escalate. And what did escalate mean? That we had to, instead of sending one small ship, we had to build a flotilla. And so we started doing that by reaching out to different organizations in countries, not like these formal organizations, but community activist organizations. And we got a number of them to join us from these different countries, and each one raised money to get their boats. And come May 2010, we had a 7-vessel flotilla, and 3 of them were big cargo ships. And so we loaded those with rebuilding supplies, because so many homes and businesses and schools and mosques and everything were demolished in Operation Cast Lead, but Israel was not letting in rebuilding supplies so people can rebuild their lives. So that's what we focused on, but we also brought wheelchairs and other things. On the night of May 30th, going into May 31st, we were contacted by the Israeli military telling us that it's a blockaded area and we were to turn back. I was on the radio over and over again telling them that we are a civilian convoy and we have humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza, and we constitute no threat to Israel or its armed forces. So leave us alone. Don't hit us. They kept trying to say, turn back. And we said, we're not turning back. This blockade is unlawful. People have a right to receive this aid. We are civilians. We have no weapons. We don't constitute a threat. And then they stopped radioing us for hours. I actually put my head down for a nap until I was awoken by like shots. They're coming. I went up on the outside, kind of on the deck, and could see their helicopters and their boats coming up on the big ship, the Mavi Marmara. I was on an American flagged smaller ship. And I remember thinking, gosh, those people must be so terrified, because I was used to all of the bullets and what we're having in the West Bank, been in all these demonstrations and dealt with Israeli violence. But you had clerics on that ship, you had mothers and students and hundreds of people on the Mavi Marmara, like 500 people who had not dealt with that before. And all of a sudden you have a military invading and shooting. Before they even board your boat, they are shooting at you. Our boat tried to get away for a little bit. Not that we could really outrun them, but we wanted a little bit of time to be able to radio out that we are under attack and we need help. And we weren't getting signals on our satellite phone. So we tried to race ahead, but at one point it was futile, and they boarded our boats and beat up everyone on board. The first thing they come after when they raid your boats is your cameras, your camera and your recording equipment, your phone. And that's indeed what they did, so they could control the narrative. I didn't realize that some of our colleagues were killed until we were taken into the Israeli port of Ashdod, all these police and military, and we were all interrogated. And actually an Israeli interrogator told me that they had killed 9 people on the Mavi Marmara, and one was in coma for 4 years, and then he died. And they were trying to say, telling me that they are terrorists and they were taking advantage of peace activists. It's all kind of bullshit, really. But we had some people really seriously injured. They were detained for a few days, eventually deported. I wasn't deported. I was beaten up pretty significantly. And then they wanted to get rid of me. They literally threw me out. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any money. They took all our money. Also, all credit cards. I had nothing. And then so I sat on the ground. I'm like, I'm not going. I can't go anywhere. And they had a van come by. They picked me up like partially by my hair and threw me into the van. And as soon as I got into the van, then it's the only time I've really been punched in my life. The driver turns around and like punches me in the face. They drove me, I don't know where, opened the door and literally like pushed me out of the van. And I think I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was like in a hospital. We had our colleagues killed, those of us detained, everything that we had, all our cameras, all our footage taken, except for one journalist who managed to sneak out some footage. But they were able to control the narrative for days after this attack on us. And what did they do? They go around and collect the kitchen knives and lay them out for the journalists to see that we were armed and there were terrorists on our boat and we were dangerous. And that's the narrative that they went with and they picked up. We didn't make it to Gaza, but people, I think, saw a lot, and there were actions taken in response to what Israel did that I think were significant. It really gave a boost to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. We even had some statements from countries that were critical because Israel killed internationals. And for us, we didn't want to back down again. And it's not just backing down like it's a pride thing, but again, for me, it was like this overall notion, like, do we accept that we allow this to happen? That might is right and they can do this and they can just use enough force to get people to back down and believe that they can't do anything. And nobody wanted to give into that. And so the following year, we built an even bigger flotilla, actually. We had more people and we had 10 ships. But what happened then is that Israel had worked with the various countries to stop us. So Cyprus wasn't letting us go anymore. Greece wouldn't let us go. Turkey had also issues. I think they stopped a ship. So we weren't able to go. And that's really brings us to today, where just a few months ago, I was in Istanbul. We had a flotilla ready to go. One of our ships filled with 5,000 tons of humanitarian aid. And not that this was a humanitarian aid mission. And when I say it's not a humanitarian aid mission, we always stress that Gaza and Palestine as a whole is not a humanitarian cause. Right? It's not a cause of just people needing more humanitarian aid. It is a political one, and our actions are political. It is fighting for the human rights and dignity of the Palestinian people. They deserve to be free. They don't want to live on aid, and they shouldn't have to. With this flotilla that we were trying to take during a genocide, we filled it with as much food and medicine as we could carry. And obviously, people needed it. It was humanitarian, but it was also, you had a very political message. You had us really trying to say that you have a situation of a genocide where the International Court of Justice has said there is plausibly a genocide being committed. All of these scholars and practitioners of international law saying it was genocide being committed. And even if it wasn't a genocide, it is brutal slaughter and people are being starved. Like, that's the situation that you have. And the very people that have announced that they are going to deny the civilians food, medicine, and water, they said that from day one, they are allowed to control what gets into the civilian population. Like, how do you accept that, where all these humanitarian organizations and countries saying that they're sending aid, but you allow Israel to decide if the aid's getting in, and if the aid gets in, what gets in, so that Israel can deny anesthesia and deny crutches and deny generators and deny maternity kits and all of these things. I don't understand how that is a security threat, but yet we accept that they're denying. They don't allow them to bring in water purification tablets. To anyone saying, well, go through Rafah or bring your aid this way, in the way that Israel accepts, no, because they should not have the right to control what gets in. That is not a world order that should be acceptable to anyone, and we are going to challenge it. We know what happened to our flotilla in 2010. They killed 10 of our colleagues and no accountability. Nobody was ever held accountable for that. We know that all of the people that Israel has killed with no accountability, and we know that they're even more vicious and brutal and violent now because they're actually carrying out a genocide and tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, and they don't care. They don't care because we have accustomed them to being immune from any kind of liability or responsibility. So they're not going to care. They killed already the World Central Kitchen volunteers. Again, no accountability. So they're not going to care actually if they kill internationals, they kill us. So we had that knowledge and we told everybody that came. We still had hundreds of people come to Istanbul ready to get on those ships. And we're actually determined. And when we were delayed, people seriously like crying and frustrated because that just a few miles away, people are suffering and dying and starving to death. And you have something that you can bring. We told them, look, we can't guarantee your safety. We can't guarantee anybody's safety. We can take as many precautions as we are able to. And we made sure that everybody went through training so they know what to expect. We outfitted those ships with communication capabilities. We put all governments in our countries on notice so that it will be clear Israel's on notice. Israel, this is who we are and this is what we are doing. And we are civilians and we don't constitute any kind of threat to you. So if you hit us, you are deliberately targeting a civilian convoy. And that is like a number one rule in international humanitarian law. Civilians are never to be targeted, not even one. I remember when I was in law school, I actually got that question wrong on an exam, thinking, if there was some military necessity that you can target a civilian. No, you cannot. Some civilians might get killed in certain operations, but directly targeting a civilian, that is never justified. We took all those precautions and we were ready to set sail. And the day before we were going to board our ships, we learned that our flags were pulled from our ships. You can't sail without the flags. We won't be allowed to leave port. Every ship needs to be flagged under the flag of a certain country. We had chosen a certain flag of convenience and Israel had pressured them. They took their flags away. So we were postponed. It was this bureaucratic attack that we were going to overcome, and we did. It took us a while. We had to send people home, which was devastating.
Very powerful about the flotillas, Huwaida. I mean, I think breaking the siege in and of itself we always talk about it as a figurative thing, but to be able to do it literally and suffer the consequences, the most extreme consequences, is inspiring. It's also empowering. And I think for sure for the people back home in Palestine, as you mentioned earlier, they know they're not alone. But we also we understand that this is more proof that this didn't start on October. This is more proof that the Israelis don't care about innocent lives. They don't care about Palestinians in general. They have a Zionist agenda and they want to implement it by all means necessary.
So I want to say, during the research and actually seeing you live, how amazing it is to see you have your children on stage with you. And that's going to be something that I assume they're going to remember forever. So kudos to you for doing that.
I do try to include them in everything. It is too much. And of course, I don't expose the kids to all of that. But in some ways, I think I just let them have their childhood bliss and think that the world is all candy and roses. I do question myself a lot, though, because a lot of the stuff we're involved in, especially now because things are so bad in Palestine, the worst that it's ever been. And so it is all consuming. And whereas I want my kids to be a part of my life, their father's life in every way, and kind of what we do, I do question when one might be too much or if we did the right thing. But I think it's okay, if it's in your class, if somebody's being bullied, you can say something, you can do something, all the way up to when the president is doing something wrong, you can get out there and protest. If they learn or take anything from me, I hope it's that there is always something that they can do and that they're not helpless and they don't have to accept what they see is wrong.
One thing I read, I sort of put myself in your shoes if this would have happened with my children, where your son said, "You don't care about us, you care more about Gaza." What was going through your mind at that moment and your initial reaction? Because that's a tough one.
This was a few months ago. I remember that I was working actually in the kitchen and he was in the living room and he did say that. He's like, "Mama, you don't even care about us. All you care about is Gaza." I said, "Do you really believe that?" Later, he did say, "Mama, I know that you care about us. It's just that you're always working. It's always on your mind." One of the things that I'm afraid of really is that they'll remember their mom not laughing, not enjoying, constantly upset in this period in their life. I try to catch myself, but it comes back to me and having to work on myself. I've never been very good at that from when I was young, but I want to try to be better really for my kids and to try to be present, like when they have their sports events or when they have their school events or anything in this past year, especially, even if I'm physically there, mentally, it's been hard to be there. I don't know necessarily how to balance this because I can be in my own headspace, I can be in my own kind of trauma. How much that affects them is something that I'm constantly thinking about.
Huwaida, it's really important for you to know and for everybody, all the listeners to know that this is all of us in the movement right now, all Palestinians in particular and Lebanese, etc., but Palestinians as we are, have had to reconcile with how much we're present and how much we're not. So your words have resonated with me and I'm sure with Ed and with so many people. I'm positive the finding the balance between being mom and being present and doing the things that a parent should do, and also reconciling with the pain and the inability to stop a genocide. I want to definitely acknowledge your feelings on that, and I don't know that there is a right answer for any of us. And so particularly those of us who are extremely active on the Palestine front. Your words are so important because they do echo so many, and I think people hear themselves in you. So I want to recognize that.
What we are seeing in Gaza is unlike anything imagined possible. Not because I'm naive and think that these atrocities haven't. Of course, we know that they have happened throughout history, right? Going back to my young 5-year-old self, in that this country believes in human rights and democracy and freedom and all of the things that we talk about. It's not only the shock of realizing that that's not true. Like that's certainly one thing, but personally, I've always held on to this belief that people are fundamentally good. There's a fundamental goodness in everyone. And if they're doing bad things, they just don't know. When it comes to Palestine specifically, it was this belief that people just don't know what's happening. And there is a limit to what Israel could do before world outrage would just stop it. And that, in a sense, is what propelled me, the part of my life where I was with the International Solidarity Movement. I was a young new college grad in Palestine, saw a lot of these horrors. This was like unjust. I'm going to try to stop it. And we started this organization. We started this movement where people from around the world would come and, in a sense, take advantage of Israel's very kind of discriminatory nature, Israel's racism, because people who were coming were not Arab, were not Muslim, and obviously not Palestinian. And that, from the government down to the foot soldier, made a difference. They didn't really want to hurt white people because they couldn't justify that as easily. And so we did what we could do there. But I was thinking Israel is doing kind of these horrible things, and we just have to continue, because the international solidarity movement was about getting people into Palestine to stand with the Palestinian people, to try to stop some of the atrocities, to try to get in the way, to join Palestinians in their protests, but also to document, to take those stories so that we can get other people to know. The mainstream media continues not to do their job. We will create this alternative source of knowledge for people to understand what's happening in Palestine. I originally went to Palestine after graduating from college, and it was supposed to be for a year, maybe, and then I wanted to go back to law school. But then the Intifada broke out, and I wanted to be able to do something about it. So I was joining the marches, and we started the International Solidarity Movement, and then I couldn't leave. And I was able to do what I think a lot of Palestinians would want to do. And I recognized, and heard stories. I was contacted by Palestinians who wanted to join. They weren't allowed in. Or if some are allowed in, if they did some of the things that I was doing and they were arrested, they would be banned for life. I had also that Israeli passport. So I felt like I was in a little bit of a unique situation where, of course, I didn't have protection from being killed, but I had some protection, at least legally. And I wanted to use that as much as possible. And then I wanted to use whatever I had in terms of knowledge or connections, having grown up in the United States and yet still being able to kind of fit in Palestine, being able to bridge those, make connections as much as I could. I thought I was going to Palestine for just a year before I would go off to law school. But with the Intifada and with what we were doing, I wanted to stay. And even when I did finally tear myself away to go to law school, because I wanted to try to get educated there and to try to use the law to get justice, to affect what's happening. I graduated from law school, took the bar exam. I didn't even wait for the results. I went right back to Palestine. And something will always kind of draw me there. And again, I think that's not unique to me at all. So not just the internationals that I talked about, but so many Palestinians too, if they could get in. I know that so many people can't. I had this unique situation where I had these passports that would allow me to not just get in, but to challenge really the system, because I've been arrested by Israeli forces countless times. But in the end, I get out, right? Palestinians, are held for years for like a Facebook post.
Didn't you almost miss did you miss your wedding because you got arrested? Was that right?
Yeah, it was in 2002. Adam and I and others from the International Solidarity Movement were trying to do as much as we could to help this situation, to whether we were doing media work or humanitarian work, trying to get aid to people, trying to protest. The Israelis besieged the Church of the Nativity. The situation was very dire in there, and we had tried to do something. And so we organized to try to get in, to try to take food to the Church of the Nativity. All of Bethlehem was under total siege. Like nobody could be moving. To walk a lot of the ways, there were no cars moving, and we had to scope out the Church of the Nativity and what we were doing and plan our approach, because it was surrounded by tanks and soldiers and snipers. And well, long story short, we managed to get people into the Church of the Nativity, about 9 or 10 internationals inside. And we tried to use that later to get pressure on the governments of these internationals to end the siege. Because again, going back to this, when it's Palestinians alone, they don't care. But internationals inside, where they have governments that are responsible for them, puts kind of a little bit more pressure, a little bit more media attention. We were all corralled into this area in front of what was called the Peace Center. It's very ironic here. Israeli soldiers surrounded peace activists in front of the Bethlehem Peace Center. I'd asked everyone to sit down, and we locked arms and we sat down, and we had the soldiers over us with their guns. I heard a voice above me saying, "You have to go, Huwaida. This is not the University of Michigan anymore." And that was shocking. More shocking to look up and see that not only was my former classmate an Israeli soldier now, but it was a classmate that I really liked. Although we had differing political views, he did try to talk to me, and I said I wouldn't talk to him wearing his vest and his gun, and he took them off to talk to me. You know what his first question was? What happened to you? And I was like, what happened to you? What happened to you that you would come and join this foreign army that is occupying people, that is doing this stuff? And, he's just brainwashed with this. They're only going after the terrorists. That also serves to dehumanize the entire population. We think that you're only going after certain terrorists. Why are they terrorists? Because they are resisting this injustice. As if Palestinians are supposed to accept living in that situation. If I was going to ask anybody living in, even in just a fraction of what Palestinians live in every day, you would accept that and not do anything about it. But anyone that does anything resistance is a terrorist. I was taken to jail, and the Israelis wanted to deport me. I'm like, I'm not signing, I'm not going. And they realized that they were going to have a more difficult time with me because I was an Israeli citizen and they would have to go through a longer process. But anyway, I was locked down. I'm like, I'm not going. There were 13 of us. We went on a hunger strike. I did manage to communicate with Adam, and he was telling me to leave, to just accept deportation, because nobody was really paying attention to us. So I'm going to sit in jail, but nobody's paying attention. But something in me would not let me do it. And so it was going on to about almost a week. My wedding was 2.5 weeks away. Shoot, I might really actually stand him up because I'm not going to accept my deportation. But after almost a week and 6 days of hunger strike, the Israelis agreed to allow me to leave, not deportation, and that I would be able to come back. And so I did agree to that after long negotiations, saying that this is not only a deal given to me, because there were 12 other Americans mainly locked up, and they were all on hunger strike. But when I landed in the United States, I learned that they had reneged on their deal to everybody else. So they just got me out, and everybody else, they stayed. That was devastating to realize not only were these people in, but it's like my fault. Like, how could I have been so stupid to believe that they would actually do that? Like, why didn't I stay longer, make sure everybody, else got out first? All of these things. I mean, my sisters were trying to get me to go find a wedding dress, to get fitted for a wedding dress. And I'm just thinking, like, how stupid. But that's what happened. I made it to the wedding.
Congratulations. Adam was very happy about that. So I do want to ask you, because Adam is Jewish, and I'd like to ask about that dynamic. I mean, clearly you all are a power couple, but what does that dynamic look like? And has anybody criticized you, for example, just being a Palestinian, marrying a Jewish person? And how's that dialogue gone?
In 2002, there was a lot of kind of not only criticism, but attacks on him and his family. He's from Brooklyn, New York. In the New York Post, there were a couple of journalists that were just vile, and his family had to leave and be put under FBI protection because the JDL, which is the Jewish Defense League, which is like a terrorist organization, had published his family's address and said, I forget the exact language, but like, let them know what we think of traitors. So they were calling him a traitor. I think it was the New York Post, something like sleeping with the enemy. And there were some other kind of ridiculous and violent pieces that was not coming from, the Palestinian, obviously, side at all. And so Adam really said, he's like, no, we haven't faced any backlash or anything from the Palestinian community. The Arab community have been very welcoming. It's mainly been from, the Zionist community. Although we don't talk about it a lot because we don't see ourselves as, you're Jewish, you're Palestinian, or anything like that. We are just people. We're human, and we fell in love, and religion shouldn't divide us. Adam's not religious anyway, but even when it came to extended family or friends, we have more in common than we have difference when it comes to religion or culture. But when it comes to political ideology of the Zionist, which Adam obviously is not, there's nothing in common there. I mean, some people focus on it, and when we get the opportunity to answer, like, yeah. I remember our parents were first a little nervous about meeting. My parents were really nervous about meeting their parents. But after the first encounter, that's actually something that both sets of parents said when they were talking about our cultures and tradition that, wow, we have more in common than we have differences. And that's the way it should be when you are not the ideology that one people is entitled to more privileges than another. So gratefully, Zionists in our family, Palestine is not a religious conflict. Unfortunately, you have a lot of religious zealots that get in and try to make it that way. But when it comes down to it, when we can connect as human beings, our religion should bring us together, not divide us at all, because a lot of people don't understand that. And again, while it's not a thing between us, if there's an opportunity to kind of point that out, we do.
Bringing us back to now, given the situation with the politics and with the current election cycle that just happened, you have been involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2020 as a DNC delegate. You are part of the Democratic Party by running for Congress, which was huge, running for Congress as a Palestinian-American in Michigan as a Democrat, and then running for regent of the University of Michigan, I believe, right? We see Congress trying to pass bills and laws to criminalize either the students or organizations in the United States by accusing them of being terrorists or association with terrorism, which is something we know has been used historically against our community, particularly after 9/11. There's other bills attacking the international system, the United Nations, with regards to discrimination, this quote unquote discrimination against Israel for putting Israel on notice for their actions. What has been your experience with the Democratic Party, and how has it culminated into where we are now?
Yeah, so a lot of what we covered, I think, is my role as an activist, right? And I think that that's probably the most important thing for me. But I have been for many, many years organizing on the outside, if you will, because you are doing these actions and mobilizing and knocking on doors of those in power so that they can change their policies. And then became a lawyer to see how we can use the law. And so you're fighting in the courtroom, fighting in the streets, you're fighting in the courtroom. And then you have those rooms where the laws are made. And so I thought that I could try also getting in there. There was the importance of my campaign, and sure, I wanted to win, but I was like a first time candidate for anything. And running in a district where a lot of other candidates got in the race. Not that they had more roots in the community, but a lot of my work before then had been international as opposed to local. And my community here was really all domestic. And that was fine, really. I managed to package that well in terms of what happens over there affects us over here, not only in terms of like just human beings and international solidarity, but in terms of what our money, your hard-earned tax dollars. We're talking about Medicare for all. We're talking about these different policies. We're talking about school loans or you being able to afford going to school. We are talking about you being able to afford your rent or your medicine, and how much are we giving to this country in order to colonize and oppress another people. So I was able to merge those messages in fighting for people's rights here and also fighting over there, and they're not very different. In fact, it also has a direct effect on people's rights here. So not only where your tax dollars are being used and the right to have them come back into your community and not going to support a foreign army, but also how much is our speech being constrained here to protect a foreign country? How many American citizens are being injured and killed and no accountability to protect a foreign country? Also, why is our government here prioritizing the agenda of a foreign country over the rights and safety and welfare of their citizens? And so I think the campaign in itself like opened a lot of people's eyes. I'd like to think that. But in campaigning, I wasn't only talking international. Actually, I really focused more domestically and also on the Democratic Party, because we hear a lot about how young people aren't that engaged. When you talk to the youth, and you always want to get more youth involved, they are the future. So many youth don't find their political home in these parties. I think the rhetoric of the Democratic Party is good or is acceptable, but when it comes to actual practice, people get very disillusioned. I was not quiet about that, even when I was speaking to a room full of Democrats. I'm like, you want people to join you, but this is what you are doing. So don't expect anyone to get excited by just your rhetoric when it's only talk and no action. In fact, at the time, I remember we had all this talk about your right to control your own body, but you had the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, endorsing a candidate in Texas who was opposed to that in order to defeat the more progressive candidate. So where's all your talk about how important this is to protect women's right to choose and the rights over their own body when you, like the most powerful Democrat in the country after the president, endorsing candidates that are anti-choice in order to defeat a progressive agenda? What I did want to do is to send a message to a lot of younger people, a lot of also Palestinian, Arab American. You know, when I was younger, I had wanted to be president or to get into politics. And then at a certain point in my life, I thought, no way can I get into politics. I have become too much of an activist, and people like me who are outspoken in words and in actions can't get into politics in US office. I wanted the message of my campaign to be the opposite. Somebody like me who has been an activist and has been vocal can get into office, can win, should run, because we need better representatives. We can't go on with just the kind of corrupt people with a lot of money who are part of this oppressive system, that they are the ones who are always winning and representing us. So I wanted a lot of people, and especially kind of people from the community and people who are active and passionate, to think that they can run, and it is a space for them, and you are needed. And the money that it takes to run for office is daunting for a lot of people, and it turns a lot of people away. But what we don't realize as much is that the money is needed to get the vote. What you really need as a candidate is the votes. If we want to take it to the election that we were just in, when you look at Kamala Harris and why she knew that not disavowing genocide is not popular. Most Americans want us to be on the right side of history, yet a lot of her donors, a lot of the big money was coming from the people that are apologists for Israel. She raised a lot of money, but that did not get her the votes. So as a candidate, if you're thinking about running, like, yes, you need some money, but if you manage to get enough volunteers to go door to door to do that campaigning for you, then that's even a better way of getting the votes, and you maybe not need so much money. So a lot of these things, it was my experience of getting in and trying it out. I might run again. I don't know. It is not easy to run for office, but I definitely wanted to support other people who are running, because again, we need people to represent us, our communities, our values, our beliefs, and people who aren't beholden to big corporations and corporate interests, and who will do and go where the money is. And that's what we see now. And that's why we're in this situation that we're in. My run for University of Michigan Regent was not something that was planned at all. I had recently come back from Istanbul, still working on trying to get the flotilla off. And when I was approached with the idea, it was July and the election was in August. That's never something I had wanted or thought about. But those who were asking or who were looking for a candidate were actually the students and some of the staff and faculty, but really the students of the University of Michigan, fighting their university's complicity in genocide. And they had faced a lot. They had done amazing organizing. And I was actually inspired by them and their desire to take that street organizing and turn it into like political action. So for that reason, and the importance of getting a regent in the University of Michigan who would listen to the students and work to actually protect the students, because the violence of the administration against University of Michigan students has been abhorrent. And I'm an alumni of the university and have just been so incredibly disappointed, and also disappointed and horrified as a civil rights attorney, seeing what they are doing and the rights that they are jeopardizing and actively violating in order to silence speech. At the University of Michigan, you had the regents and the administration After the county prosecutor declined to prosecute people who were involved, you had the university administration actually ask our attorney general, the highest law enforcement in the state of Michigan, to go prosecute these students for protesting to stop a genocide. It is ridiculous. So I said I would do it. I said I would run. And my campaign was only about 3 weeks long. And then came the Michigan Democratic Party convention. And it was 2 days after the DNC. I was up in Lansing for the Michigan Democratic Party convention, where they would have the election to nominate the regions. And honestly, it was just so humbling to see the turnout of people who came out to support this campaign. And it all goes to the organizing of the students. They literally had only 2.5 weeks. And the first 2 days, they registered like 2,000 people to be able to vote, and kept track of them and kept them updated, and were able to get at least 700 out to the convention, of which there were only about 1,300 people, 1,400 people at the convention. So we were the majority, and you could see it because they were all in my shirts and pom-poms and engaging, attending all the caucuses, helping people. It was inspiring. From the reaction or the way the Michigan Democratic Party behaved, really disappointing. I would think that the party would have welcomed this, right? Because we're always talking about getting new people and getting young blood and getting people more actually engaged. And here is my campaign that not only registered more people to join the party, but actually brought hundreds out that were excited about engaging in the democratic process. It's something that was great to see, and I would have hoped that it would have been more embraced by the Democratic Party, and it wasn't. I had some local chairs come up to me and say, "This is amazing. How can we keep this going?" So when the vote actually came, generally these things don't come to a vote. There were 5 offices that the party was nominating people for, and they're all just kind of pre-selected and just approved. But when I entered the race, that University of Michigan Regent race became contested. And so we had to have a vote, and people cast their votes, and it was an electronic vote. So you would think that within minutes, within maybe half an hour, you would have the result. Over 2.5 hours, what's going on? I tried to have people from my campaign go to where the votes are being tabulated, because generally in any election, you have people that are guaranteeing the fairness, the transparency, whatever, of the election. We could see that people from other campaigns were going in there, but nobody from my campaign was allowed in. And so finally, I went to this area, and I'm like, look, I am the candidate. I want to get in and see, what's happening, where they're tabulating. And they're like, oh, wait a minute. And then they came back and told me that we're just going to kick everybody else out. So instead of letting me in, they're just going to get everybody else out. Then they call in a bunch of police. After 2.5 hours, it was mainly my supporters left. Some people told me, like, from the party, we just thought you won. That's it. Like, we overwhelmed the campaign and people went home. So my supporters just stayed. So they called the police. And then the chair of the convention came out and announced that I lost. So the other 2 candidates got higher. There was such disbelief in the room. Like, wait a minute, how does that even happen? Show us the math. Show us how you calculated this. I went up to the executive director and said, I'm challenging this. We don't accept the results. And basically, I was told that there's no way to challenge it. So they don't have any kind of transparency or oversight mechanism. There's no way to challenge it. I could just file a complaint with the party. They have an appeals committee. And people wrote letters, petitions, release the raw data, let us see it. And they won't. They said that they gave us the raw data, but what they gave us was whatever they were doing for 2.5 hours behind those doors. That's the data they gave us. So we sued. We hoped that we could get a preliminary injunction to get them to release the data before the names were finalized for the November ballot, but we didn't end up doing that. The lawsuit continues. We had a state lawsuit, but we dismissed that because there are really constitutional violations. I filed a lawsuit in federal court and added some of the state claims, but the major claims are the violation to our rights to equally engage in the democratic process, in the electoral process. The party is a private organization, right? Generally, the amendments don't apply. It only applies to government. But when a private organization takes on a public function, in this case, the Michigan Democratic Party took the responsibility of holding the primary, then they are responsible for protecting people's constitutional rights. The Michigan Democratic Party came into court. It was eye-opening for a lot of people. It was shocking just how brazen they were about courts should just stay out of it. That's really their message. The courts should stay out of this. I had asked the court to order them to have an audit of the election, to release the data so we can do some kind of audit. And they say that it's not in their bylaws and the court can't make them do something that's not in their bylaws. But we are accusing them of actually violating so many parts of their bylaws, including the fact that they allowed more voters to vote than were properly registered. That lawsuit is ongoing. I realize that the law doesn't always fall on the side of justice. Actually, a lot of times it's not on the side of justice, but I think it's important to use it to expose a lot of these policies and the practices that they have just made custom. It's custom to them that this is what they always do. We have our bylaws, but they just do what they want. And when we raise it, they just say, oh, well, this is the way we do it. And that disenfranchises especially the progressive elements of the party, because they're always putting their people in certain places, again, not following the bylaws. So as much as this lawsuit can be used to kind of expose some of this, I hope that we end up with a ruling that orders them to follow their bylaws for future elections. It's just for equitable relief, just to make them do certain things that will expand the ability of more people to be fairly involved. The progressive element of the party feels like the party uses kind of their power to work the system in a way where their voices are kept out. I have gotten involved in the Democratic Party, but I haven't felt like it's actually been a home for me. And my political outlook on this is that we should try as much as possible to work on the inside. How much can we change by actually getting our voices in there? Try to break this very corrupt duopoly. So I'm very much for continuing to build power outside, doing what we can inside, especially when it comes to pushing for that change so that the party can really start living up to its rhetoric. Because what you have is just talk, but when it comes to implementation on the ground, it's nowhere near beginning to live up to what they say they stand for.
Huwaida, what happened in Michigan, I think is important to note that this is not an isolated incident. It's crucial that everybody who's listening understands that many of us, Palestinians in particular, but progressives as a whole, are told the Democratic Party is the tent that brings everybody in. Yet Palestinians in particular, but also others, are very often tokenized and marginalized. And we saw it extensively this year because the Democrats sold us nonsense and continued the genocide. And then on top of what they were doing to Palestinians, trying to work within the construct of this two-party system, particularly the Democrats, because we don't have any other option, or we thought we didn't have any other options, we were silenced at every level. You with the Regent run in Virginia, there was a huge effort to prevent all resolutions so they don't have a resolution on Gaza. It's similar to what you said when you walked in and they told you, oh, since you're coming in, nobody else, khalas, everything is shut off or everybody else leave. It's exactly the same thing. They banned all resolutions, including ones that the party was running on, just so they don't have a resolution on Gaza and Palestine. And they succeeded in doing it in a couple of places, but then we mobilized against it and we were able to do it. But they also violated their own bylaws to do that. So the extent of dehumanization and erasure of the Palestinian people in particular, and our voices within the construct of this party system where we are told this is your political home, has been proven that the Palestinians are not willing to sit silently and nod our heads and say, sure, great, yes, thank you for having us in the party. We're there because that's the only option we see within the duopoly. And we will continue to work to push both parties on that front. But it's important to also expose the hypocrisy of the party as well, and the extent of silencing. They did that with the Bernie campaign as well, to your point, with the progressives, right?
What I thought was particularly devastating is you had these big names nominating the other two candidates. I had student leaders nominate me. So you had the room full of the party tons of students who had come out supporting me, and the student leaders from the university, from the different campuses, get up and make a speech about the kind of representatives that they want. So how can you sit there as a Democratic Party member and you hear these students telling you like their woes and this is what they need to see and this is why we want and need this person, filled with like hundreds of their fellow college mates and whatnot, their colleagues, and do what you did, right? Students are our future. It's the future of the party. It's the future of the country. And they were sent away with the message that the party wanted to give them. They were so disillusioned. And there's a video on it online with some of them yelling like, you just lost us. You just lost Michigan Democratic Party, because how are you going to win without us and without our vote? And it wasn't they were saying that because their candidate didn't win. It was because of the way you did it. Show us actually what you did. They used the police to push us out of the convention. And before that, they had written to my campaign. Basically, the executive director sent me a message saying they had to spend all this money to hire more security because we were going to be there. Like, what kind of message are you giving us? If you would have acted a little bit differently, or you didn't have these other forces pushing another agenda and you were really about democracy and involvement, and we could have had a much better turnout. It baffled me. And for days, I was writing to the leadership and I was urging them just to be transparent, because hundreds of people left disillusioned and you need them because we're coming up on this important election. Don't leave it like this. Be transparent for the benefit of the party. And silence. Like, I was stonewalled. And then so when we made them go into court, they came into court saying court should stay out of it. Basically, they can handle their own affairs. So no accountability to anyone, and certainly not their members. Yeah, I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the percentage of people. 70% were asking the Democratic Party for an arms embargo and stop the genocide on Palestinians, and they refused, knowing full well this could cost them the election. So they were willing to risk their own party and their own quote-unquote success in this system just to prevent our voices and just to prevent the end of the annihilation of the Palestinian people in Gaza. It speaks volumes of what we're dealing with and the power of the Zionist movement within the two-party system. Thank you so, so much for being with us. It's been such a pleasure hearing your story and reflecting with you. And I hope we hear you and see you again on our podcast on Sumud.
Well, thank you for drawing some of those stories out of me. It's not always easy to talk about a lot of them, but thank you. It was really an honor to be with you.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.